Hi, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Samson David. I'm the CEO of Soroco. And with me today, I have Radovan Simic, who joins us from Basel. Radovan happens to be an EY alumni. Radovan also happens to be an absolutely dynamic digital transformation leader at Bayer. Radovan is a very demanding customer and an awesome one. So Radovan, so good to see you. I'll kick it off with a brief introduction to Soroco, dive straight into the dark side of the moon, the phenomenon called the dark side of the moon, and then I'm going to hand it over to Radovan to talk about 3 amazing success stories around the stunning work that he is doing at Bayer. Soroco was founded by a bunch of techies from Harvard, MIT, and CMU. At the core, we are a deep tech company with 200 engineers, 200 of the top engineers across Boston and Bangalore. We've got 50 patents. We serve about 100 customers, out of which 30 are Fortune 500 or Global 500, like Bayer. We operate across the world. We're growing rapidly. We've grown about 20x over the last 3 years. We've been named leaders in our space. So if you look at every analyst, they plotted us as leaders. Bloomberg actually said that we are one of the 50 ideas in 2022 that defined 2022. You've got thought leadership papers in Harvard Business Review, in Forbes, and various other forums. So that was a very quick introduction to Soroco. Over the last 12 months or so, I've traveled around and met more than 100 CXOs. And no matter which region they come from, no matter which industry they come from, they all seem to have 3 prime objectives that they're driving. One is driving growth, they're driving revenues, and they're driving delivering a stellar experience to their customers and their employees. Now, towards that, every organization has got different change programs. One towards revenues, around optimizing costs, around delivering superior experience. Now, if you look at data from McKinsey or from Bain or from Everest, a large number of these programs don't really deliver the results that they promised. And the question is why? These programs are very strategic. They have the highest levels of visibility. They have great governance. They have the best minds working on them, and they're rightly funded. So why is it that so many of these programs don't deliver as expected? We at Soroco have a hypothesis, and we believe that most organizations are blindsided by a significant blind spot, and I call it the dark side of the moon. So what is this dark side of the moon? Enterprises usually have good visibility of how their systems work. And this visibility comes from looking at their systems of record applications like ERPs or CRMs, and looking at it through the lens of processes and transactions. The primary source of truth is the insights that you get from log files and the transactional databases that these systems of applications write, systems of records applications write. Now, organizations believe that if they know how their systems are working, then they know how their processes are working, how their teams are working, how everything else is working. And that is the blind spot. Why is it so? Because 60%, more than 60% of the workday is actually spent outside of these systems of record applications. Teams are working on emails to communicate the last mile of work. Teams are working on other SOR applications to complete the last mile of work. Teams are working on documents to complete the last mile of work. And as teams are working and interacting with software, they're creating a massive data set. This data set is about 300 trillion interaction data points per year. So that's a massive data set. It's complex, it is unstructured, it is undocumented, and it is untapped. Unlike the transactional data set, which is on the lit side at the moment. This data set is just lying around in the dark side. This data set also is a gold mine of insights for organizations, obviously because 60% of the workday is being spent on this. And if organizations could get structured insights into this very unstructured, chaotic world, then that will go a long way in improving the performance of both the perform part of their portfolio, which is their day-to-day operations, as well as the transform part of their operations. We've all grown up with this adage saying, no, you can't improve what you can't measure. But I'd like to add, if you can't see it, how will you measure it? So the dark side of the moon is real. It is very significant in enterprises. Let's take an example of automation. Many organizations have invested significantly into automation programs. There has never been more expectations from automation programs. And the scrutiny also on automation programs and their ability to be able to deliver ROIs and business outcomes has never been higher. The key challenge in front of automation programs is not how to automate. There are many technologies out there. You could use RPA, you could use IDP, you could use chatbots, you could use OCR technologies. There are many technologies out there. But the holy grail of automation is to know what to automate. And there's no one what, there are many whats. What are the manual work patterns within my team? What are the different ways my teams are doing the same work? What should I eliminate? What should I optimize? What should I standardize? What should I automate? What should I not automate? And what is my ROI? Across all of these things, right? Organizations fundamentally are looking at getting the answers to the what manually by doing massive discovery workshops. Now, there are challenges with the discovery workshops, right? It takes too much time. It takes too much time out of business. It is expensive. It is opinion-based. It's not fact and data-based. It's a point-in-time based, this manual exercise. It's slow. It's not as scalable. So organizations really need to have technology to be able to solve this problem. And this technology cannot be looking at just log files, because log files will just tell you what the systems of record application is doing. What you really need is technology which is looking at the dark side of the moon and illuminating the dark side of the moon. How do we light up this dark side of the moon? You'll see task mining, you'll see process mining, you'll see task discovery, you'll see process discovery, process intelligence, hybrid process mining, you get process understanding. There are a bunch of terms out there. But if you distill through all of these things, there are really two sources of truth. One, you look at log files, it will tell you what your systems are doing. Then you really need to look at the interaction data set between how people are interacting with software. This will illuminate the dark side of the moon. There are two fundamental types of technologies out there right now. One is computer-based vision. What is computer-based vision? Computer-based vision is really, you take a bunch of snapshots, you stack them up together, and then you scrub it to get insights. There are three fundamental challenges with this technology. Number one, it doesn't scale. Number two, it doesn't get you as sharp insights as you need. And number three, there's a fundamental privacy issue. You can't be taking a picture and say, hey, I'm not looking, and then scrubbing and submitting it. So these are fundamental challenges with the computer-based vision technology. Soroco has taken a very different approach to solving this problem of lighting up the dark side of the moon. And we call it the Scout work graph. The Scout work graph is very similar to what Google has done with Google Maps. What has Google done? Google fundamentally has taken every point on the planet and has mapped it. For every point, Google has got the metadata and the relationship data across different points. And with this, it's created a massive graph with billions of nodes and billions of edges. And what can it do? We all know what Google can do. Google can do four things. One, it can tell you the lay of the land. I'm standing here, there are streets around me, there is a restaurant around me, there are parks around me, whatever else. Point number two, if you want to move from point A to point B, Google can tell you, hey, look, there are 5 ways to go from point A to point B. This is the best way for you. These are the number of steps in between. This is how much time it will take. And oh, by the way, this is what the traffic looks like in your path. The third thing that Google will tell you is, as you start the journey, Google will tell you, it will give you real-time insights, which is to say, hey, if I took a wrong turn, it'll say, don't worry, rerouting. Or it'll say, found a faster route, do you want to take it? And the fourth thing that Google has done is to be able to take its rich graph, expose it so that there are other people who can build applications on it. So if I'm a restaurant, I could get discovered by Google. I can also say, hey, look, do you want to book a table? Right? Our Scout work graph works exactly in the same way. How so? The core data set is the interaction data set between users and systems. And what we've done with Scout work graph is we've taken this and we've mapped every point. For every point, we've got the metadata and we've got the relationship across the points. And we've got a graph built with millions of nodes and millions of edges. What can you do with it? Just like Google. Number one, it'll tell you what the state is as is. What is your as is state? Number two, it'll tell you if you want to go from point A to point B. What does it mean in the context of work? It is really when you're kicking off a bunch of tasks or processes. It'll tell you, hey, look, there are 18 variations. For every variations, these are the steps. This is how much time it's taking. This is the best variant, or these are the best variants that you need to do. And oh, these are the hot spots that you might encounter. The third thing that the Scout work graph can tell you is as you go along as part of the processes, it can give near real-time insights. Number one, it can tell you, hey, look, this is stuff that you can optimize. This is what you could standardize. This is a credible automation pipeline that you can build. This is how you can automate. This is what you will get after you automate. This is how you can rationalize your application landscape. This is how you can drive technology adoption and a bunch of other things. And finally, the Scout work graph also allows enterprises to build rich applications on top of it. This is our approach to building the Scout work graph and lighting up the dark side of the moon. This is what the work graph looks like. So at one end is a lot of chaotic individual interaction data points, and then across layers and layers and layers of intelligence and learning, we construct this graph which allows you to get insights which you can action. These are the core design principles of the Scout work graph. Number one, the focus is always on teams. Number two, users are anonymized, PII is redacted at source. Onboarding is really easy. It requires minimal integration with existing tech landscape. Value is delivered at speed. So the first set of insights, you can get it in 2 to 3 weeks. In 6 to 8 weeks, you've got very, very rich insights to start making your decisions. Value is delivered at scale. There are hundreds of teams. When Radovan talks about the scale at which it's been deployed at Bayer, it's more than 1,000 people. And at the core of it all, it's about empowering teams and it's about empathy. Where is Scout being used? Scout is being used across the perform portfolio of our customers as well as the transform portfolio of our customers. Automation is one of the use cases of the Scout work graph, but Scout is being used across many other things. It's being used across horizontal functions like supply chain and HR and customer service and FinOps. It's being used by bank around retail operations. It's being used in insurance under underwriting. It's being used by retail customers in terms of their supply chain. So that is brief about Soroco, about the dark side of the moon, and about how to light up the dark side of the moon. And with this, I'd like to hand it over to Radovan for him to tell us some of the stunning use cases that he's got of lighting up the dark side of the moon at Bayer.
Thank you also, EY, for having me today. So I'm really glad to share our experience and our joint journey that we had with Soroco and specifically with Scout. Just to quickly introduce myself, I'm as Sam highlighted, I'm one of the EY alumni. So I was starting my career actually at EY, and then soon moved into supply chain in different industries. I worked in retail, I worked in pharma, I worked in consumers, I worked in agriculture business. And since 5 years, I have built different automation programs at Bayer across different divisions, but also worked closely together with Soroco as one of the first deployments we've done back in the days in Switzerland. What I'm passionate about is really how technology can drive business outcomes. And through that journey with Soroco, it was always a co-creation and a mental brainstorming, how we can use technology to make more visibility, to get better insights that can be actionable, right? Not just getting the insights and report them out, but really actionable insights. So today I'm going to show you basically 3 use cases. One is how we were basically having certain challenges after post-merge integration when Bayer acquired Monsanto. We look into how our row crops team in planning to use or not use the systems of records, as well as at the end of the presentation, I will share a bit how we are increasing our customer experience through process standardization and automation. First use case what we were looking at our 2018 when Bayer was acquiring Monsanto, we had actually two organizations that were doing business, right? Across supply chain, you can imagine that this is quite a challenge because you actually want to deliver the customer with all the products that you have, but you have different ways of working. You have different systems, different processes, different physical supply chains. So for us, it was really one of the key challenges is really to look into how can we bring those two worlds together. So some of the challenges we were actually seeing was basically that we had a lot of processes that were documented or not documented that were just done in a way that it was growing over the years. We had different teams, but also applications mayhem. So we have more than 3,000 applications that are used where we even don't know, if that's really something that we still need. We had a lot of overlapping systems, dispersed data. So you can imagine if you bring two huge companies together, you see that you have still the legacy systems and the legacy data sets, but they need to be somehow integrated and made visible. There is also a strong change fatigue, and we had a lot of people that were joining the company, but also leaving. So there was a lot of challenges, specifically in the years 2020, 2022, not to mention the pandemic of COVID. So that was really one of our business challenges that we said, okay, we might have a business continuity that was under threat. So why we use Scout is actually to identify first and have a better understanding of cause and effect of our end-to-end processes. Where do they start? Where do they end? Who is involved? What applications? What teams? How many transactions? How many applications we are using? So that we can also document our processes in the new reality. But that also helped us, as Sam mentioned earlier, to identify where does process optimization make sense, and also where do we have automation potentials, just looking at the as-is. So what we've done, and some of the outcomes in Bayer North America product supply business, we were identifying a set of opportunities. So we identified RPA opportunities, right? So there's a lot of potential, like we're talking here about 20, 30,000 hours per year that we can actually automate only by doing RPA. We also identified, okay, we need to rewrite and redesign our best practices and our SOPs, specifically the trainings, right, to train our employees. It is not just about automation. It is about training. It is about raising the awareness. It is about education. We had an optimization and a standardization landscape that we were able to build, and it helped us as well to enhance certain systems because we saw the same transaction in different organizations were used for different purposes. So why not learning from each other and seeing that to generate a certain outcome, you have to do certain system enhancements, but always with the big picture in mind to look into how can we achieve a higher standardization, harmonization, but also then automating. But also it's alternate solutions. I was joining the earlier session when I think it was James when he was explaining that there is a lot of different applications when we talk automation, right? And this is also what we identified. We said there is not just one technology that we can use, but there is a set of technology. There is a technology stack that we can use fit for purpose. So sometimes the dashboard is much more meaningful and much better than automating a poor process with Excel and PowerPoint through an RPA. So these were all the insights that we were getting so that we can streamline on one hand our application landscape, simplify and harmonize our procedures, and then ultimately use the right technology to automate it so that we can enhance the employee experience as well in our organization. And Scout was actually giving us the foundations and giving us the baseline, as Sam has shared it before, to basically look into those different data sets and different purposes that we were actually identifying through this data. The next use case was actually in planning. So as part of the agriculture, we do have Bayer as one of the leaders in agriculture business. We do have a huge business with row crops, so corn and oilseed rape. And our planning team, it's nature, right? So it is easier to plan in a chemical environment where you can control to some extent, but planning in nature is much, much more difficult. So what we saw is that due to the uncertainties, due to the situation we also had with COVID, people were fragmented. They were working at home. We were not having so much, let's say, interaction, and we had a lot of workload. And this resulted in one of the all-time lows in our employee voice of employee surveys that we were doing. So really complaining about high workload. We are spending a lot of time and on screen. We also saw that we have a lot of duplication of efforts across multiple spreadsheets and systems. And we just felt like when you talk to the planner, he would say, well, I feel we are just doing the same thing over and over again. But we were not able to quantify that. We were not able to measure that, right? Because it's not visible. You don't have a data log of Excel. You don't have a data log of Teams, how much time you spend on Teams. We don't have a data set that you can look into, is the process executed in a standard way or not? When you talk to the people, they will say, well, I'm supposed to do the process in this way. Or when you get a training, how you get onboarded in a new team, they will say, look, this is how you should be doing the process. But now I show you how you actually have to do it, right? So this is what also gives us an insight of, well, there is a certain set of data that is not giving us what we need in terms of process improvement and automation potentials. We were scouting. We said, okay, let's do scouting. We also wanted to identify what are our opportunities, because we have to switch from one planning tool to another, because we have now one of these once in a career lifetime opportunity to implement a new planning tool. So from demand planning all the way down to production and detailed scheduling. So we were selecting a small team, about 20 users in 9 locations across Europe and Africa. And we were identifying about 19 to 20 processes. And one of the stunning, let's say, insights were really that our teams were spending about 90% of their day in Excel, toggling taxes and sharing and searching for data. And toggling is, if you do an application switch with Alt-Tab. So this is the time when we say, how often do we do toggle? How often do we switch the screen and the application on the screen? And only 1% in SAP. So as a supply chain organization, you would be recognized in an organization that will say, if you talk with, commercial, sales, R&D, finance, and supply chain, they will say, okay, supply chain is SAP. It's a transactional world, right? They're mainly working in SAP. And now we see that when we look into data and in the screen time and how much we really spend time on different applications, we see it's only 1%. I give an example. We have this European availability report, 8 Excel files, and about 950 days spent per year in the team in these 8 Excel files. That's one of the use cases where we say, okay, now this makes sense because we have an ROI, 950 days. We want to understand what's the root cause. So we use Scout to do the upstream scouting to identify users and to identify the root causes. We then can do a consolidation of reporting because we say, in order to generate this output, what are the things that you need to do to generate it, right? So think differently, think outcome-based, think what is the outcome that you want to achieve, and not what's the input you give in and let's automate it, right? On the other side, on the long term, right, we are talking about adopting to a new planning system. We also want to have a better integration of data between the different systems. But now we see where do we have which data sources, how are they fragmented, how they're unstructured, and how can we use this data to better prepare for a new planning system. Or what we also do now is how do we use this data of Scout and the work graph to prepare for the S/4HANA implementation, right? Because we have a huge opportunity here to scout at scale to identify all these opportunities. The third success story is one of my favorites. It is the customer service team in Europe and in APAC. You can imagine that one company had more centralized customer service organization, so very regional and central, and the other legacy company was more country-oriented, so very close to the customer. Local languages were spoken, but then you can imagine that the procedures were completely country customized, right? So it was not having that standard way of interacting with the customers. That was also reflected when we did Scout because we saw we have a high process complexity and a very high workload. So when we looked at Scout in the first time, so we did it in 2021, the first time before we actually did a target operating model change. So we identified that about 26% of the working time was spent in teams. So it's customer service. They should be spending most of the time with the customers, but actually they were spending a quarter of the day or a quarter of the year in teams. So chatting with each other, searching files and so on and so forth. We identified that about 8,500 hours per year were just toggling. That's about 5 to 6 FTs, depending on what baseline you take. So we pay 5 to 6 people in customer service that do nothing else than just toggling, switching applications on the screen. Of course, if you have a team that is 200 or 300 people big, that makes a difference. And we spend about 23,000 hours per year on tasks. So these tasks, they are not necessarily linked to a procedure or a process. It is really something that happens here and there. It's a fragmentation. It's a task hotspot. It looks like an activity. It looks like a process, but it's not part of the core process because we do know what are our core processes. So we had a lot of challenges like We don't have visibility in the end-to-end procedures. We have a lot of inconsistent processes. And what we were identifying with Scout, as I mentioned, we've done more than 98 procedures, more than 7 business functions. We have quantified inefficiencies, including all the residual efforts as well as the toggling. And we already have automated more than 35,000 hours in Europe and in APAC through automation. So here, what you see as well, we've done in 21, the first scouting, we saw all the mess, we saw all the complexity, and now we are in a much better shape. We are now in a much better position when we're looking into where do we do work, where does work happen, and how do we actually interact with our technology. And what I'm most proud of is we are now using technology for continuous improvement. So it's not just I do an initiative here and there, I do a lean, black belt project or a green belt project here and there. It's more like we're using technology to enable a continuous improvement through data. So that was basically it, based on my 3, let's say, use cases. So just to sum up, when we talk about lighting up the dark side of the moon at Bayer, we're using Scout since 2018. We have deployed it across 40 countries. We are especially proud that we were able to do Scout as well in countries with a very strong data protection and data privacy laws, such as France and Germany, where you also have works councils. So we are able to do that as well in those countries. We've mapped more than 500 procedures. We have more than 1,000 colleagues. And as you see here, we did standardization, application optimization. We have enhanced our employee experience, the customer experience, and also automation. So our ROI, it is quite good ROI that we have identified through the data sets with Scout, and the journey is continuing. Thanks a lot for having me. And I think we're now at the end of our presentation.
Thank you so much, Radovan. Radovan, you've been an absolute rock star. So, hopefully this has given everybody a glimpse of, what the dark side of the moon is in the enterprises and what is the tech that can help solve the dark side of the moon. And Radovan so articulately, walked us through some absolutely stunning work that he's doing in terms of, post-merger integration, in terms of, customer experience as well as employee experience. So with this, we come to the end of our session.